a blood pressure cuff hugging her arm like a worried friend. She looked small, the sort of small that has nothing to do with size. Her eyes found me before they found him. And I don't know what I expected to see there after years of politeness and choreography. But what I found was Trust's younger cousin. Permission, don't apologize, she said. Her voice a paper cut. I wasn't going to, I lied. They think it was something like benzodiazepine but more, Daniel reported, translating a doctor's brevity into family. They're flushing your system. You're going to be okay. Ava tried to smile and found only its outline. I knew the minute I swallowed it. It tasted like pennies. Isn't that strange? Pennies, I have a video, I said. Because the truth is a thing that grows anxiety if you don't feed it facts. It shows who did it. Ava's eyes sharpened. Who? Lydia. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Ava blinked once, slowly. I wondered which ghost it would be, which, Daniel repeated. And if a word could carry an entire marriage on its back, this one tried. Ava, she looked at me, not over me, not through me, but right at me. If I tell you everything, Emma, will you believe me? I surprised myself. Yes, I said. Then I want you in the room when I tell him, she said. And the him did not carry contempt. It carried love's last good intention. But first, call the police. I gave the thumb drive to the attending physician, who took it like a hot coal and promised chain of custody. The officers arrived quickly, and for once I was grateful for the way our city loved a scandal. They took statements, borrowed the hospital's computer to watch the clip, adjusted their faces into the complicated geometry that sits between sympathy and professional interest. A detective with a notebook older than his suit asked questions that gently pried apart the night. Who knew about the dinner? Who had access? Who had a grudge worth poisoning? He wrote down Lydia's name carefully, as if names could slip off paper if you weren't careful with the loops. He excused himself to make calls. When he returned, his jaw had a new set to it. Miss Cross has a pharmaceutical rep license, he said. It was suspended 6 months ago pending an investigation into sample misuse. Daniel made a sound. It could have been a word. It could have been a life cracking. Ava reached for him. I'm sorry, she said. I should have told you when it started. But I didn't know where it would end. Start where it starts, I said. Because if we were going to walk through a fire, I wanted to know the shape of it. She folded her hands on the blanket. And for a moment she was the girl I imagined she once was, telling the truth to a school principal because lies made her tongue feel heavy. 3 months before our wedding, she began. Lydia called me. I'd never met her. She said she wanted to have coffee. I said that wasn't a good idea. She said she would show up anyway. She did. She told me she wanted Daniel back. Daniel's mouth opened and closed. She told me that if I went through with the wedding, she would ruin your life. She said she knew things about your father's company and the way the contracts were managed. And she hinted she had evidence manufactured, real. I didn't know. I didn't take her seriously. Then 2 days later my father got a visit at the office. A man left an envelope. Photos, a spreadsheet, a timeline. Everything designed to suggest that the Johnson Foundation was a pass-through for money. That wasn't clean. The foundation isn't, Daniel began. And then stopped, remembering the world didn't care about truths if the lies had better lighting. We brought in auditors, Ava continued. It was clean. It was always clean. But the story didn't need to be true to stick long enough to stain. Lydia called me again. She said, call off the wedding. Or I begin to whisper, why didn't you tell me? Daniel asked, and the question wasn't a knife. It was a hand groping in smoke, because I didn't want to start our marriage with a ghost between us. She said, and because I thought she'd get bored if we starved her of attention. She didn't, she kept breathing on the glass of our lives. A rumor here, a strange email there. I thought if we stayed very still, it would pass, and today? I asked. Ava closed her eyes. Yesterday she called again. She said congratulations on the baby. Daniel flinched as if the word had been thrown. Ava, I was going to tell you after the dinner, she said. And it was the closest anyone in that room had come to weeping. She said congratulations. And that she would make sure the child never saw his father hold a steady job again. She said she was tired of being ignored. The monitor made its even green climb and fall. Somewhere outside, a gurney squeaked. A phone rang. An intercom apologized for a code only the staff understood. Inside our small square of curtain, a truth unfolded its legs and stood up. She came to hurt you. I said, not a question. Ava nodded. Or to make me hurt you. I don't know which flavor of cruelty she prefers. Daniel pressed his palms to his eyes. When he let them fall, he looked older by a year. This is my fault, he said. I brought her into our orbit. I kept her there even when she'd gone. I told myself she was harmless. I told myself she was just sad. I wasn't paying attention. There is a thing mothers do when their children try to pick up boulders. We remove the boulder quietly and replace it with a stone that fits in a pocket. Your fault, I said, is not a language I am willing to hear tonight. We are going to speak in verbs: protect, report, prosecute. The detective cleared his throat, almost apologetically. We've sent a unit to Ms. Cross's last known address. We'll need all your phones. Any messages? And he glanced at me. You said a note. I handed it over. He slid it into a small plastic sleeve and tucked it into his notebook as if he were putting a leaf between Bible pages. We'll be in touch, he said. Which is the sentence you get when the world has spun into the machinery of due process. After he left, the corridor lights dimmed to their version of night. Daniel sat, elbows on knees, a man holding his head up with his hands. Ava slept for a while, the kind of sleep that looks like surrender but is really negotiation. I went to the bathroom and stared at my face in a mirror streaked with the day. 59 looked back at me with new math. I splashed water and practiced not falling apart. When I came out, Marina was in the waiting room. Her apron gone, hair unbraided, suddenly a person who might be taking a late train home. I wanted to make sure, she said, and then saw Daniel through the glass and softened. She will be, I said. You saved her. Her eyes shone with something that wasn't pride and wasn't relief. It was the feeling of stepping aside just before a truck comes around a blind curve. The manager fired me, she said, almost sheepishly, for accessing the footage without permission. Then he just gave me my first job since I retired. I replied, tomorrow morning, be at my house at 9. Wear whatever you'd wear to tell the truth. We're going to make sure the city knows your name for the right reasons. And that Casa Aurelia knows mine for the wrong ones. She stared at me like I'd said we would fly. Are you sure? I am tired of being polite while people slip poison into the spaces between our words, I said. That era ended tonight. When I returned to the bay, the nurse had adjusted Ava's fore and left. Daniel was at her side, his head bowed, his lips moving. I am not a woman who pries into prayers. I am a woman who recognizes the posture of them. I sat on the other side and watched the monitor breathe for all of us dot around to in the morning. Ava opened her eyes and looked better by a mile measured in skin tone. The doctor came, gave us the good version of the story. The dose had been non-lethal. The system was clearing. They'd keep her for observation. The talk screen would be back within a day. He left us a silence that felt earned. Ava said after a while, I need to tell you something that will make you think less of me. I have thought too little of you, I said. I am busy correcting that. She smiled, then sobered. Lydia wasn't just Daniel's ex. Before she started threatening me, she tried to be my friend. She sent me articles about managing foundations, about optimizing tax structures, about appearances. She told me secrets I didn't want because that's how some people buy your silence in advance. And once, I answered her. I told her that sometimes I felt like I wasn't enough for your family, that you and Daniel had a language I didn't speak. She used that, over and over, to wedge herself into our sentences. I let her. I reached for her hand. Then we take back the language, I said. Starting now, Daniel cleared his throat. We'll need a plan, he said, because men who cannot fight with fists learn to fight with calendars. Lawyers. A press strategy, security, and a locksmith, I added. For our lives, he looked at me with something like gratitude and something like fear. Mom, he said, why did she hate you? She doesn't, I said. Not enough to act. She hates the fact that I am a door she cannot walk through. But Ava is a mirror. Lydia cannot pass a mirror without performing. Ava squeezed my hand. Then let's stop giving her a stage. We were quiet then. In the fragile blue of hospital morning, a decision landed in the room like a bird that had finally found its branch. It was not loud. It was not even dramatic. It was simply the moment you decide that you will not be prey. At 5. I drove home under a sky that had not yet chosen a color. Ruth was asleep on my couch, a blanket crooked over her like a shrug. Layla had made a flotilla on the coffee table out of napkins and tape. Each boat had a name scrawled on it in her fast, careful hand: Emma, Daniel, Ava, Leela, Ruth, and, oddly, Marina. I picked up the last one and smiled. Children know how to add people to family before the rest of us get the paperwork in order. I put the kettle on. The house felt like a body exhaling. In the quiet, the phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. For a half beat, my heart turned into an elevator dropping. I opened it. "You always were the clever one, Emma." Lee sat down. The kettle began to rattle the way kettles do when they are one breath from singing. I typed slowly, as if my fingers could steady the world. "You will find, Lydia, that clever is the least of the things I am." I pressed send and watched the tiny blue bubble float away into whatever night she had made for herself. Then I went to wake my granddaughter for school. Because even in the wake of poison and police, children need breakfast. And I had no intention of teaching Leela that monsters rearranged the morning. When she came into the kitchen, hair wild, eyes bright, she pointed at the boats. "They're ready," she said. "So are we," I answered, and meant it. That day moved like a procession. Marina came at 9, hair in a neat knot, wearing a jacket that fit as though it had been waiting for this occasion. I fed her eggs and asked about her mother in Queens and her classes at night, and the way she could balance a tray with the grace of a mathematician. We sat at my dining table with legal pads and a list of names. I called my lawyer, a woman named Joan, who had once said to me, "If you will be brave, I will be sharp." I called a reporter I trusted. I called the board chair of the foundation and told her enough to prepare her without terrifying her. Daniel sent updates from the hospital punctuated with pictures of Ava's color returning to her face. The detective texted, "We have Ms. Cross in custody. Found compounds in her apartment consistent with what was in your daughter-in-law's system." I stared at the words, custody, found, consistent, language that looked like a rope with knots big enough to hold. At noon, the doorbell rang. I expected the reporter. I expected the UPS man, a bouquet, a neighbor with the wrong address. I did not expect my sister, hair askew, eyes blown wide. "You won't believe who's sitting in a car up the block," she said, breathless with the joy of finally being necessary. "Your ex-husband." I hadn't thought of Kent in weeks. Which is to say, I had thought of him daily and simply renamed him work, weather, errands. "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious which chapter of our history had crawled out of the book. "Because," Ruth said, savoring each word, "he's with Lydia's mother." I stared at her, then at Marina, who lifted one eyebrow like a question mark given permission to speak. I laughed once, softly, of course. Families are not lines. They are not, matey, I told Marina. "I'm going to invite the past in for a very polite chat." I took my coat from the chair where I'd thrown it last night and stepped out into a day that had chosen, finally, to be bright. The car idled at the curb like a thought that hadn't decided whether it was worth saying. I walked toward it the way you walk toward a stray dog, slow, hand open, ready to be bitten and unwilling to step back. Kent opened the passenger door and unfolded himself with the stiffness of a man who had spent 40 years escaping responsibility only to find it waiting in his driveway. The woman who stepped out of the driver's side was smaller than I remembered. Yes, I had met her once at a fundraising dinner where she'd shaken my hand and said, "You're the woman who took my daughter's place." Her hair was a steel helmet. Her mouth was drawn in. She looked at me as if I were an answer she had expected to hate. "Emma," Kent said, twisting his wedding band, a different one, newer, thin around his finger. "We heard about the incident. You thought you'd check whether our misery had room for 2 more chairs," I said. And then, because I have learned that humor keeps grief from multiplying, I smiled. "It does not. But you can stand." Lydia's mother, Margaret, that was her name, lifted her chin. "My daughter is not a criminal." "No," I said gently. Your daughter is a woman who confused attention with oxygen. The law will call that criminal because it involves vials and cameras and tape. And I will call it sad because it involves the absence of a father who should have told her no. And did not, Kent reddened. That's not fair, it's accurate, I said. And the last time I checked, accuracy is a kindness in ugly clothes. Margaret's eyes flashed. She loved him, she said, and the him had a child's possessiveness, so did I answered. So does his wife? Love is not a deed. It is a verb. And yours has done harm. For a moment we stood in the arithmetic of it, 3 people at the curb, carrying a woman who had made herself a weapon. A police cruiser turned onto the street, slow as a thought. Margaret watched it as if watching her own pulse. I came to ask, she said, voice suddenly small, if you would keep my name out of the papers. I teach, I have students. They will Google me. I surprised us both. I'll try, I said. Not because you deserve it. Because your students do. Kent exhaled a gratitude he had not earned. He looked as if he might step closer. I tilted my head in the way he had learned meant, this is as near as you are allowed, go home. I said, be a father. Even if it's late. Especially because it's late, they left. The cruiser did not stop. The day went on with the stubbornness of days. Inside, Marina had made tea and arranged cookies on a plate, with the excessive neatness people reserve for moments when their hands need a task. I told her, briefly, about the car conversation. She listened as if she were taking notes on a class she had not known she'd enrolled in. What now? She asked. Now, I said, we build a life with locks that are also windows. I called Daniel. Bring Ava home when they release her, I said. We'll keep watch. We'll keep Joy. And tomorrow we'll meet with Joan and the board and the detective. And we will turn this into the last chapter in which Lydia gets a line. And tonight? He asked. Tonight we eat cake, I said, and heard, for the first time since the flute chimed against linen, the sound of my own birthday returning to me like a boomerang that had taken the scenic route. When they arrived just after sunset, Ava moved slowly, but she moved. She walked into my house and put her hand on the mantel as if greeting an old friend she had mistaken for a stranger. Layla barreled into her carefully and then drew back, solemn. I named a boat after you, she said. It didn't sink, Ava laughed, then pressed her lips together as if catching a sob by its sleeve. Thank you, she said. I will try to live up to it. We lit candles. We did not make wishes. We made promises to tell each other when the past calls, to invite the other into the room where it happens, to say I'm afraid without apologizing, to notice when someone swaps the glasses after cake, when the kitchen was a battlefield of crumbs and the kind of contentment that makes you want to sit on the floor. My phone buzzed again. The detective, we executed a search warrant at Ms. Cross's apartment, his text read. Found draft emails to several donors. She had planned to leak fabricated allegations about your foundation tomorrow morning. I typed back, thank you. Then I added, as if to lengthen the gratitude so it could cover the people who had stood between us and the worst version of the night. Please note the waitress Marina in your report. She is the reason my daughter-in-law is alive. Will do, he replied. And Miss Johnson? Happy birthday. I set the phone down and looked at my family, some given, some chosen, glowing in the light of a day that had tried to break us and had failed. I thought of the note, of Marina's steady gaze, of Lydia's precise, empty hands. I thought of how quickly a life can pivot when a stranger decides to act like kin. My name is Emma Johnson, I said, to no one and to everyone, the way you might test a microphone or a heart. And this is the year I stopped mistaking politeness for peace. The room did not cheer. It didn't need to. Layla pushed a paper boat across the table until it nudged Jessie the dog, who had slept through most of our saga, and opened one eye only for dessert. The boat tipped, righted itself, and continued. I watched it and thought, not for the first time, that survival is simply the art of learning to steer what was meant to be decoration outside. The night leaned in to listen. Inside, we began, without ceremony, to live. The next morning began with the brittle brightness of too much coffee, and a sky that had rehearsed being kind overnight. I woke before the house, sat at the kitchen table where last night's crumbs made a star chart, and wrote 3 sentences on a yellow legal pad because writing anchors